General Boykin, you dismiss this as another case of the Pentagon using the military for a social experiment. I'd like you to tell Colonel McSally directly, knowing her background, look into that camera and tell her why she's unfit to serve in combat.
Well, Chris, you need to frame this thing correctly. It's not an issue of women in combat. Women are in combat already and have been since 9/11, in fact, prior to that. And Colonel McSally is a great example of how women can be used effectively in combat. My issue here is mixing the genders in infantry units, armor units, and special forces units is not a positive. There are many distractors there, which puts a burden on the small unit combat leaders and actually creates an environment because of their living conditions that is not conducive to readiness.
Colonel McSally, those are the two basic arguments. You're a combat pilot, but you're not formally, you're not in combat on the front lines. You are attached to combat units, and the two arguments are, one, physical limitations, particularly to serving in the infantry, and also this question of a distraction during operations when you're in close quarters. There's no privacy, and they're very rugged living conditions. Look in your camera and tell General Boykin why he's wrong.
Well, let me just say that I realize that flying combat aircraft and being in the ground in combat are two very different missions. However, the same flawed arguments were used against allowing women to fly in combat and now allowing women to be in ground combat, like General Boykin has said. These are flawed arguments, and the bottom line is we need to treat people like individuals. What are the capabilities they bring to the fight, which includes physical strength, plus courage, plus aptitude, plus leadership, and all the other things we need to have the most effective fighting force. So we are a country that sets standards and then allows people to compete as individuals. And if they bring the better soldier to the fight, then women should be able to compete on equal grounds. I'm not talking about changing standards. I'm talking about allowing people to be considered for what they bring to the fight.
Well, let me, Colonel, if I can follow up on that, because the Marine Infantry Officer Corps offered last September a course, training, and two women took part in it, and they both dropped out, and they said carrying those 70-pound backpacks and infantry on the ground is just too tough for women. Are you confident that women can meet the same physical standards for ground combat that men do?
Look, we know the bell curve of men is stronger than the bell curve of women, but they overlap. And so the current policy basically says that no women can meet the standard, and therefore all men can. So that's like saying, General Boykin, Pee Wee Herman is okay to be in combat, but Serena and Venus Williams are not going to meet the standard. The bottom line is we treat people like individuals. Physical strength is one element of needing to be in ground combat, but all those other qualities I mentioned, like aptitude and courage and discipline and leadership, are also what women bring to the fight. The Pentagon estimated a few years ago that 75% of 17 to 24-year-olds are not even qualified to be in the military. So we're recruiting from only 25% of the population. 15% of them go on to college. So we need to recruit from 100% of the population in order to make sure we have the most effective fighting force.
Let me bring General Boykin in here. I have to say I like the analogy of the Williams sisters versus Pee Wee Herman. And I also would point out that Colonel McSally competed in the Ironman triathlon, the military division, men and women in Hawaii. She won. So what does that say? I mean, clearly some women can meet the standard.
Well, first of all, some women can meet the standard. I think there will be few, but some can. But that's not the issue that I raised initially. What I've raised is the issue of mixing the genders in those combat units where there is no privacy, where they're out on extended operations, and there's no opportunity for people to have any privacy whatsoever. Now, as a man who has been there and a man who has some experience in those kinds of units, I certainly don't want to be in that environment with a female, because it's degrading and humiliating enough to do your personal hygiene and the other normal functions among your teammates.
Let me ask Colonel McSally to respond to that.
Sure. Again, right now we're in a 360-degree battlefield, and women or men are serving together out there in combat. Privacy is a red herring. I mean, you can figure out the privacy issue as long as you have the most capable, qualified force. That should be no reason for these exclusionary policies. Some of our closest allies have already figured this out for many years. Canada is the best example. They've had women fully integrated into their combat forces. They have taken serious casualties in Afghanistan. Women are out there on the front lines, leading men in combat and doing a fantastic job of it. So this privacy issue, or men and women being next to each other, it's the same issue we've seen, which is a myth, really, and it is not a showstopper to make sure we have the most capable, qualified fighting force.